What do CEOs need to know about sales these days? A lot. Outdated sales strategies and tactics plague most companies today. Listen to what innovative CEOs and experts have to say about how to change all that with Sales Talk for CEOs. Welcome to Sales Talk for CEOs. Those of you who know me know that I talk a lot about having A players on your team and what life would be like for a CEO if their entire team was A players. It's not impossible, but it isn't easy either. Now, especially in the case of hiring salespeople, this is something that every company I have ever worked with struggles with. Hiring salespeople is a little bit of a different game than hiring some of the other players on your team because salespeople are built to sell and they're going to sell you on hiring them. So sometimes we wonder after we've hired them, what in the world happened? In fact, I've heard them say, "You're not the person I hired." And in fact, that's the name of one of my favorite books on hiring that a good friend of mine, Barry Deutsch, wrote. So today we want to dive into this. How do we hire salespeople? How do we get the best? How do we have a sales team that all perform at the top, right? Think it's impossible? Well, it's not. Today I have a guest with me who has, like me, been over 20 years working with tech CEOs and their senior sales leadership to ensure that they have full pipelines and A players on their team. So, Kristie Jones, welcome to the show.
Alice, thanks for having me on.
So, tell us just a little bit about what your company does, and then we're going to jump straight into this topic because I know that everyone wants to know how to make it easier to hire A players in sales.
Absolutely. I was a sales leader for 20 plus years, as you like to say, before starting my own consultancy business about 8 years ago. And so I saw the struggles out there. I myself, as a new sales leader early on in my career, made some hiring mistakes. So I spend time on really 3 areas with my clients, and I work with really kind of small and mid-sized organizations, some privately funded, some VC backed. But I help them build out and formalize, document all of their sales processes. So before we go and start hiring individuals, I want to make sure that we have a formal sales process, a successful sales process, something that can be replicated and taught during onboarding. So I make sure that we have everything built out and CRM matches everything. So that's sort of step 1 for the clients I work with. And then step 2 is, I call it hiring help. I'm not a staffing company and I don't source and I don't charge percentage of base salary. I actually project manage or handhold companies through the process. You are never alone with the candidate. I am there every step of the way through every interview. And then thirdly, I do a couple of things. Sometimes I am doing sales training, just coming in just to do the sales training part. And sometimes I'm doing some interim sales leadership as a result of perhaps a sales leader not working out.
Yeah, that's a lot. And you do a lot of the things that I do for my clients as well. And I know that you are really good at what you do and your clients truly appreciate it. And I will say that with every client I've ever worked with and the current clients, we're all hiring, right? We're all hiring in sales right
Yep.
now. And it's just so difficult, right? So we get candidates. Sometimes we use recruiters. I always recommend using a recruiter. We put them through some assessments. Every company does something a little bit different. I personally like the objective management group assessments because they tell us whether people can and will sell. And that's a big help. But again, it's only one indicator, right? And
Right.
so there's so many pieces that go into this. And also, as I interview the CEOs for this show, I hear in the early days all the hiring mistakes they made, right? So
Yep.
we thought we should get somebody from, a big company who already had a book of business, or, oh, we got this person to do that. Well, part of the failure is that there's no sales process in place for the new hire to come into and be successful at. And part of it is we probably didn't hire the right type of seller for the situation our company was in that moment in time, right? And so
Correct.
that changes. So let's dive in here. Where do we start? If we want to hire, A players, the best sellers, where do we start?
We need to start by building out an ideal candidate profile, just like we would build out an ideal customer profile. So I'm not really talking about a job description. I'm talking about really outlining what the ideal candidate profile looks like. And it's some of the
And
things.
I'm going to stop you right there because what most people start doing is just the job description. That is what they write.
Yep.
They write a job description, and that doesn't really help us find the right candidate. It will help us screen out some people, but it
Correct.
doesn't really help us screen them in.
Correct. Yeah, I'm doing the same thing with ideal candidate profile as when I'm helping a company put an ideal customer profile together. So again, let's start by looking at our past A players, people who have been successful in the past. What are the traits that they all have in common? How many years of experience did they have before coming in? What type of experience in the industry or in the market that we're looking into, or the vertical, those type of things. So I want to look at both the positives and the negatives. So who worked out and who do we wish we could replicate? And who do we wish we had never hired and would never hire again? So that gives me kind of a framework, because I actually do build out the job description for my clients. And so that gives me a framework to work with. And then I start putting together the job, the overview job description, the requirements, the nice to haves. And then I even put expectations in there. I'm looking for people to self-select out when they read it. I want them to read it and go, yep, that's not me. I think opposite another podcast for another day, Alice. I also believe that sales professionals don't always know themselves well enough to put themselves in the right role. So we as sales leaders and CEOs and founders need to make sure that we understand exactly what we need so that we're matching our needs with candidates' profiles.
Yeah, another important thing that I try to do with people when I'm helping them hire is what I call success factors. And that actually does come from the book, You're Not the Person I Hired. If you list out the success factors, which is this is how we're going to measure your success, people will self-select out of that.
Correct.
Oh, they're going to measure whether I do this in the first 30 days, in the first 60 days, in the first 90 days. Yes, we are. Yes, we are going to measure that.
Yep. Yeah, and I think those are I don't I just actually reviewed an offer letter this morning to a VP of sales candidate where the organization sent it to me to be reviewed. I've been involved in helping them in this interview process, and they did not list the expectations. There was no quota. They just said variable compensation was 50%. Here's your base salary at 50%. Here's your variable compensation at 50%, but nothing in writing about how you're going to get there. And this candidate has been in the pipeline with us for a while, in the interviewing pipeline. And I will be shocked. In fact, if he accepts the job under those circumstances, I know we will have hired the wrong person.
Yeah, exactly. And that is a lookout, right? It's like, oh gosh, they didn't ask about how they're going to be measured.
Yeah.
That will make you suspicious. All right. So we get an ideal candidate profile set up.
Yep.
We do that by examining who we've hired in the past and how they've worked out, the good and the bad, right?
Yep.
Put that together, then can write the job description and the success factors or whatever you want to call them. But this is how you're going to be measured. This is what our expectations are,
Yep.
right? What's next?
Then I'm gonna run that job description through a gender decoder software or a website that I have, because you and I both know that there are not enough female sales professionals out there. But part of the reason I believe that's to be the case is that we're writing job descriptions for white male hunters instead of women of any color category or other things that we might be taking into account. And so I run it through a gender decoder, which tells me if it's heavily masculine leaning or heavily feminine leaning. And then it will also give me suggestions. So it will tell me the words that are causing it to be masculine leaning and the words that they would recommend switching out for that. So that's the second thing I do, because I'm trying not to scare off women.
Yeah, very, very important, right? We want a diverse candidate pool to choose from so that we get the best person for the role. Very
Correct.
important.
Yep.
All right. Then what happens?
Then I'm going to ask my client to, again, I'm like I said, not a recruiter, so I don't have LinkedIn Recruiter or anything like that. So I ask my candidate to post it on their company page on LinkedIn, and then I ask them to promote it. So generally, with the way the market has been over the last several years, I've not needed to go outside to use an outside recruiter. I do have qualification questions as well. So again, those deal breakers, if you will, how many years experience, what you've done in the past, what your quota has been. I create the questionnaire as well. So when they get to the job description in LinkedIn, they have to answer the questions so that we can eliminate those who are not, again, fitting our ideal candidate profile. So I ask them to do that. I ask them to promote it, spending somewhere between $30 and $50 a day. It's just sort of like doing PPC. And then we are off to the races. We're getting those resumes sent to my team.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, one of the things that's always troubling for me when I'm trying to help people hire is the candidates dribble in. So we interview one, and then it's a couple of weeks before we get another one, and then a couple of weeks. And then it becomes really hard to compare the candidates. And so what I've always recommended is to temper the candidates' expectations and let them know when the interviews will start, which I don't want to start interviews until I have at least 3 and hopefully 5 candidates. So how do you manage for that?
Um, Alice, I'm getting somewhere between 300 and 400 applications in the first 36 to 48 hours. So I have the opposite problem. That again, I think my people, if you will, you and I both work in tech, our people live on LinkedIn, and those people who are actively looking. And again, as we all know, there's no loyalty amongst thieves right now. Average tenure is 18 to 24 months tops. And so it feels like everyone is consistently looking for a new position. And so I'm having the opposite problem, which is why I have to have those disqualifier questions in place. And so if they don't answer the question the way I want, then automatically we get kind of separating the wheat from the chaff right from the get-go. But because the market is so hot right now, almost every candidate that I'm interviewing is interviewing with somewhere between 3 and 5 other companies, and they're at different stages. We are off to the races. So I have someone within my organization. I have a 1099 who does most of my phone screens. And so she and I immediately start going through the resumes. We put them in a yes, no, maybe pile immediately. And then she starts reaching out to the candidates to schedule phone screens right away.
Okay, so what we need to do is get more candidates. And so if people are struggling to do that, you're suggesting that they use the paid advertising on LinkedIn.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
We're going
All
to
right.
promote that job.
Good advice. I also recommend that they let everybody in the company know that they're hiring so that they can
Absolutely.
put the word out to their friends and family.
Yeah, the other thing I'm doing, obviously, I'm promoting it on my network, my assistants network. I'm asking all, like you said, all of the executives and everyone at the company to promote it as well. I'm also posting it on certain Slack channels, such as Rev Genius, Women in Revenue, Sisters Who Sell. So there's others
Women in
there. I'm
sales.
also
Yeah, there's
yeah,
several
women
places where you can put it.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm going into those type of places. They've all got a hashtag jobs,
Yeah.
category there. So I'm posting those there as well,
Very
and that's
good. All
helping.
right. So it's just important to know that you need several avenues to bring candidates in. The
Correct.
people who work for you are a great avenue. LinkedIn alone is a great avenue. Paid ads on LinkedIn is an important one.
Yep.
Slack groups where there are, interested people. Those are all great places. And if need be, and I do recommend when you need one,
Mhm.
absolutely use a recruiter, because you don't want to have this case what I was talking about where there's one candidate and
Yeah.
dribbling in another. You need to interview a whole bunch in a row so you can, you know, have someone to compare, right? You're sitting there looking at 5,
Yeah.
6, 8 candidates and be able to compare and pick the best.
Yeah, and I'm
Okay,
happy to
very
work.
good.
Yeah, our company's happy to work with recruiters. We do that occasionally, and then right now I'm hiring 3 account executives for an organization, and I'm working with their internal HR department. So no, I agree with you. If you need the expertise, let's go get it.
Yeah. All right. So we've got candidates. We screen them quickly because people are, like you said, if they're interested in a job, they're interested in a job and they're applying elsewhere. We don't
Correct.
want to lose good candidates. So we have to move. So that means we've got to get them screened and then get them in for the first interview. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So again, it's no different than the contact us form coming in off the website for a company where we say, like, you really need to return that call or reach out in the first 5 minutes, because they say actually the best chance of winning the deal is if you do that. So we're reacting not quite in 5 minutes, but we're reacting same day. So if we find a candidate that we're a yes on, so we do things a little differently. It caused some grief earlier this week. I'll tell you the story, but we make the candidate call us. So we email the candidate and we give them a link to my assistant's Calendly, and they schedule themselves a phone screen and they are required to call her. It is definitely part of the evaluation process. It's attention to detail. And I know that it is not what most recruiters or most hiring managers are doing, which allows us to really like test for that. And so earlier this week, my assistant had a very upset candidate who waited and waited and waited for her to call, and then reached out and said, what happened? And she said, well, you didn't read the instructions, basically. And he got very upset and said, I have interviewed for 30 jobs in the last month and no one has ever made me call them. And I'm like, well, welcome to our world. We are looking for top 10 percenters.
That's right. And that is one way to screen them out right from the beginning. Read the instructions and follow them. And if you can't, you are not in the top 10%.
Correct. And then we ask 3 questions very specifically, again, to your point about being consistent and being able to do an apples to apples comparison, not to mention the legalities around that. So we're making sure that we're doing things consistently with all candidates so that we're also in legal compliance.
So this is really important. I'm going to stop you there because I have so many clients who have been used to kind of doing what I call willy-nilly interviews. It's like each candidate talks to somebody different, that they don't go in the same order. They don't have written questions. They just kind of talk to them and see if they like them. I'm like, oh no. Number one, we need an order. Who's going to interview in what order? And sometimes that can have some flexibility to it. But these people, if I interview one candidate, I interview all candidates. Otherwise, you're not getting an apples to apples. And then the questions that you ask need to be agreed upon in advance. So if you have 5 different people who are going to be involved in the interview process at your company, they all need a written set of questions. They all need to collect the answers to those questions. And people can ask the same questions in different interviews. In fact, I think it's a great idea to ask the same question twice. 2 different people ask it, hear what they get. But those questions have to be the same for every candidate. So go forward and tell us a little bit more about that. So you've got 3 that you start with. And
yes. And then again, we'll do as I call the question on a question technique, where we'll dig a little deeper on certain ones. But first and foremost, we ask them about their compensation structure. So we don't ask about compensation because that is not a legal question. I ask about compensation structure. So I want to know, are they in a 50-50 base to variable? Are they on a 70-30? What's the structure that they have? If they at that point choose to disclose what they're making, then I've covered myself legally and I get into a little bit of additional information. So no harm, no foul. So that's question number 1. And we normally go back 2 to 3 jobs. I'm normally hiring more experience, other than I hire a lot of SDRs. So that's not always relevant. But when I get into the quota carrying reps, we're normally looking for people who are, between the $750 and $1 million quota mark. So they've got a few jobs under their belt. So we normally go back 2 to 3 years. I won't go back any further than 4 years. At this point, it truly isn't relevant. The world has changed so much in the last 4 years that going back any further than that doesn't make any sense to me at all. Right. So I asked that question, number 1. The second question I ask is, how did you leave that organization better than you found it? And top 10 percenters are doing above and beyond their job, right? So not just doing their job, but again, in a lot of the world that I live in, which is the small and mid-sized market, sometimes there are, not always resources that are available that have to be created. Sometimes, again, I hear a lot of like, I've been asked to mentor new employees, new sales professionals who come on. So I'm looking for that above and beyond when I ask that question. And then the third question, of course, I'm asking in that 30-minute phone screen is, tell me why you left the company and why you're looking, why you left previous companies and why you're looking to leave this company. I'm looking for step changers, as I call them, people who are being intentional and proactive about their career and understand, I call them just step changes. Like, is everything they've done, the progression of their career, does it make sense? Are they taking harder jobs? Are they taking more lucrative jobs? Are they taking jobs that challenge them maybe outside of an industry that they've been in because they want to learn something different? So I want to understand the career path that they've taken and if there's some intentionality around it. Unfortunately, what we hear a lot of times is, yeah, I got a call from a recruiter. And I'm like, okay. But the thing I think is so funny about that is that we are, outbound prospecting to our ideal customer profile. We are spending all this time picking the right person and researching them and getting the messaging right and all of that. And we're not handling our own career in the same method that we're handling looking for the next best customer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is crazy. And you think about it, when people tell me why they left, they were disgruntled about something, they didn't like something. And so they started looking, or like you said, someone just called them out of the blue. Yeah, not intentional at all. And I think it's really important. And I usually ask the question, not in the first interview, but in an interview later on, is on what factors will you be making a decision about whether this is a good fit for you or not?
Yep. I ask it a little bit differently, but towards the end of the next interview, which we'll get to the formal interview, I say, so what is your buying criteria? I know that
Yeah.
you're interviewing with I mean, I'm using the same terminology, right? You're
Yeah.
interviewing with 3 or 4 other companies. So what's your buying criteria look like?
How are
And they,
you going to make a choice, right?
yep,
On what factors are you making this
yep.
decision? It's important for me to know. And I think too, always I'm looking from the very beginning to learn and understand if they are a person who is of an internal locus of control or an external locus of control. And this is very hard to uncover, but the types of questions you're talking about asking start to help us understand, right?
Mhm. Yep.
External locus of control. Oh, a recruiter just called me and I decided to talk to him. Like,
Yep.
it's what's happening. It's not, I was thinking through that I've done pretty much everything I can at this company and I wanted to learn a new industry. So I decided to start looking and I made a list of the companies that might be right for me. And then I approached them. Like that's different, right? You're hearing I'm in control. I'm thinking
Right.
through. I'm being introspective. I'm not just kind of out there seeing what happens to me based on external factors, right?
Yeah, I mean, self-awareness, right? It lets you
Yeah.
know, I'm interviewing for a very high level position right now, an enterprise account executive in the cybersecurity space, and it's sales professional number one at this organization. And the final candidate that we're down to, who is going to go on site with the CEO and some other executives next week, she had tried the spray and pray method, as she had said. And she said it was just a waste of my time. And she said, then I realized I wasn't being intentional about my search. And she said, so then I stopped looking for companies who were hiring and started looking for companies that I thought would match my skill set. And she said, I happened to come across you all in my search. But and you're the only person I'm interviewing with right now. And we've been at it because it's such an important position and a high level income that we've been at it for about 6 weeks now with her, talking to her up to 2 times a week, trying to make sure, again, we want to and again, I will talk about it in a minute, but I like to flip the script at some point. So once I determine that you're qualified and can do the job, I need to make you an educated consumer. So,
Yes, exactly. All right. So let's go back. We've got
yep,
that first screening that's done by an admin or somebody who's just like,
yes.
can you lift 50 pounds? That's just the basics,
She's
right?
yeah, my assistant happens to be a former pharma rep, so she's perfect because she spent 26 years in sales in the pharma industry. So she's a great person for me to do this with. So
So
we
get
have a
past that.
scorecard.
Then if they get past that and it's like, yes, they have the
Right.
right amount of years of experience and they
Yep.
have the right, industry and blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. She lets them talk to you. You ask those 3 questions.
Well, no, actually, she's asking those 3 questions. I
Oh,
don't get
she
involved.
is.
Nope, she is vetting them out. She is doing all the phone screens. I have a scorecard. She fills out a scorecard. On top of the answers to those questions, we want to know the questions that they ask, and then other information that she gathers along the way. So we got about a page and a half of notes by the time that 30-minute phone screen is over for
Okay,
me
so
to
she
work
asks
with.
them those questions. She first, do they fit? Ask the
Yep,
questions, and then she lets them ask a few questions.
correct.
Based
Yep.
on the scorecard that she gets out of that, then you do the next interview.
Yep, she passes on nines and tens. So I want to see nines and tens only. So we pass along nines and tens. And then I schedule an hour-long behavioral-based formal interview. At this point, I'm going to also require that someone from the company join me. So even though I'm going to be leading the interview and I will be the professional interview question asker, I at that point want someone from the organization. First off, I'm not normally been around long enough to be able to answer all of the questions that a candidate may have.
Right.
But I also, again, I also want to make sure that we're starting to involve others so that they can help in decision by committee, if you will. Um, to your point, I have competencies. So I have 20 competencies that I give to my client and say, don't worry about sales, or if they're a startup, don't worry about sales or startup competencies. I got you. But what other competencies are important for you to learn more about? And then I build out behavioral based interview questions around those. So I normally spend almost 30 minutes asking the sales behavioral based interview questions. Again, if they're not competent in order, I say the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so if they've not had $1 million quota, then how close did they come? What is their sale? I ask them in depth to tell me about their personal sales process, how they move someone through the funnel. I ask all kinds of questions around sales. I also, again, accountability, you touched on it. You didn't call it accountability, but we touched on it earlier. So I absolutely almost always ask accountability questions. You called it the internal and external, but I want to make sure that they will hold themselves accountable, even if the company may or may not have an accountability culture, because not every client that I work with has created a culture of accountability internally. But I want to know that even without that, they will hold themselves accountable, and and won't need that external push, if you will. So we go through about 45 minutes of questioning of them, and then we flip the script for the last 15 minutes and let them ask us as many questions as we can get done in that period of time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so, what are you looking for when they have time to ask you questions? What are the things that help you know that they're spot on and that you want to advance them to the next level?
Yeah, I want an indication that they've done research, right? Just like if they're not going to research the company that they're interviewing with, they're surely not going to research a prospect. So I want to know that they've done their homework. I want the questions to be thoughtful around there. I want them to be more strategic sometimes in nature. So because I work with a lot of early stage companies, a lot of times they should ask about runway, right? Like what's again, a lot of my clients are in double digit growth mode, right? So hey, what's the goal for this year? You don't have to tell me the number, but can you tell me the percentage? Tell me, if you've taken funding, tell me about runway. Why now, right? Why build out the sales team now? Why hire 2 more people now? Like I want to know that they're literally interviewing, probing the sales leader, the founder, the CEO, whomever it is, because those are the people I know that they don't need my job. They will take it if it's the right fit.
Yeah, it is so true about top 10 percenters that they will ask those hard questions like about the CEO or founder, about the runway, about the investors. They will
Yes.
ask, since this territory isn't built out, how did you come up with that quota, right?
Right.
But there are so many salespeople out there who don't ask those questions. So I would imagine you're screening them out.
Yes. I mean, the questions are just as important as the answers we've gotten in that first 45 minutes. Absolutely. Same thing with the phone screen. I mean, all along the way, are they asking the right questions?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard because so many people have not been trained to interview, right?
Right.
And some people have had a job maybe for a longer period of time, even though a lot of people change jobs frequently. I've interviewed some people, it's like 12 years at their last job. They haven't interviewed. They don't seem to know what questions to ask.
Right.
So it's really hard because you want to prompt them, but I try to prepare them in the screening call. Hey, get your questions ready because we're going to want to answer any question you have about this company, about this job. Feel free to ask anything. Just to put that in their mind, because otherwise I notice they just don't seem to come prepared with good questions.
Which is no excuse. I mean, welcome to Chat GPT, welcome to Google, welcome to YouTube. I mean, for real. I mean, you can ask any of those, like, tell me the top interview questions. And again, to your point, I make it very specific. I require higher level executives to join me on this interview. And I tell them, like, hey, I'm bringing in the CEO. Hey, I'm bringing in the founder.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm bringing in the CRO, the VP of sales. Like,
Yeah,
you
ask.
better have appropriate level questions for the
Yes.
person I'm asking executives to give up an hour of their day, because it is that important. But I tell them very clearly up front, like, you're gonna have to clear your calendar, because these candidates not gonna wait a week to speak with us. They'll be gone. Somebody else will take them. And so you better come with appropriate level questions too.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's important in the screening process to have that person who's doing the screening make it really clear. This is our process. You're going to be meeting with senior executives.
Yep.
Christy's going to conduct the conversation. You need to have your questions ready,
That's
right?
right.
That's just table stakes.
Setting it,
All
yeah,
right.
setting expectations.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's really great that you're doing that. So then the next piece, okay, so you've interviewed them. You've asked all your behavioral based questions to find out whether they can sell, whether they've had a quota like this before, how they manage their day and their sales process, all those kinds of things. And they've asked you a good set of questions and
Yep.
you thought, wow, good. They put some thought into this. They go from that to what next?
I run them through an assessment, just as you mentioned. So now I want to validate, right? We spent 90 minutes with them. Now I want to validate that what I've heard is what I think I've heard. Again, I've been doing this for over 20 years, but I don't rely on my gut, right? The assessment is, as you said, another tool in the toolbox. Why wouldn't I use it if I have access to it? And I use a sales profile assessment from Wiley and Sons, the book publishers out of Texas. and it's part ACT and part all about them. So there is a verbal and math section. And so I tell people, I'm like, sharpen your number 2 pencil, get your scratch paper out, pretend you're back in the high school cafeteria, because that's really what it feels like. And they test for verbal ability and verbal reasoning and numeric ability and numeric reasoning. And top 10 percenters always score 8s, 9s, and 10s in the numeric reasoning, the puzzle piece, the numeric puzzle piece part. That's where I start to really be able to separate out the top 10 percenters.
Yeah. So that assessment, if they're not willing to take it, obviously they're out. They're not going to
Right. Yeah,
continue
we're
on.
done.
Like, we're done. So they take the assessment,
Mhm.
and based on how they do on that, they go on to the next level. And what does that next level look like?
Yeah, so we do an assessment review. At this point, I'm insisting that the person that they're going to be reporting to join me. At this point, it might not have been that. It might have been someone from HR, but I insist that the person that they're going to be reporting to join me for this interview. And so it's a 50-50. We're going to do 30 minutes of assessment review, but I'm going to start to build the bridge. This is where I'm starting to flip the script. I want to make sure that I can make the candidate an educated consumer. And so I take the information that I've gathered about them. I bring in their their manager, their supervisor, person they'll be reporting to, and I go, hey, it looks like Alice is an 8 on independence and a 2 on manageability. So Alice needs a high amount of autonomy. So, hey, Bob, let's talk about how you can allow Alice to get that autonomy without you feeling out of the loop. Right. So I'm going to ask more questions like that. I'm going to start to build that bridge. We're going to start to talk about expectations right there during the interview process. And
So
then
they're get to see obviously how well they did on the assessment, or
it's
it's
not a
not.
secret. It never is. If it didn't go well, I still schedule 15 minutes with them privately to go over it. I think again, it's a tool in their toolbox too, and they should. And what it normally tells me is that they've picked the wrong job role, the wrong
Yes.
sales role, right? So I'm like, hey, listen, like on accommodating, you're a 10. Hunters are a 2. You're a customer success manager. You've
Right.
miscategorized yourself. Now let's talk about some roles out there that fit your. Again, this is
Yes, exactly.
yeah.
That's beautiful. I mean, most people don't spend the time, but I mean, when you've whittled it down this way to the top candidates, it's so refreshing to hear that you're spending a little time with them just to say, "Hey, listen, here's how you did on this assessment," and it kind of makes us point to maybe you should be doing something else, consider something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so many sales professionals are not getting to the top 10% because they've picked the wrong sales role in the wrong industry, selling the wrong thing in the wrong company with the wrong boss.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I do feel like 15 minutes is the least I can do to potentially point them down the right path.
Yeah. Very good. So depending on whether they're a fit for the position based on that assessment and all of the
Yep.
conversations you've had previously, now you're going to just discuss it with the person who would be their manager and talk about how they would work together based on this score.
Yeah, and I let the manager at that point ask any questions that we have not asked at this point, or that they want to your point, they want to hear again, or they want to dig deeper on a question. We got a surface level answer, but they'd like to go deeper on it. So the other 30 minutes of that is really I just kind of facilitate, but I let the manager and the candidate kind of talk it out, and make sure that and they'll want to know, like, tell me about your leadership style. Tell me how you handle situations where someone's misquoted or is off track. So I let them like really start to get to know each other. And then if we're still good, I want to continue to make them an educated consumer, and I offer to let them speak to someone else on the team.
Nice.
So I tell them this is confidential, this is private. It's just the two of you. I will literally connect the two of you via email. You guys will set up a time to talk with each other. Ask them, and then this is an ask me anything situation. Ask me about ask the employee about the supervisor, about the company, about the product, about tools that they have, about the support that they're getting. Ask them anything. And I tell the employee, I set the expectations with them. I said, we've already qualified them in, so I don't need you to check for skill set. I need you to give them a day in the life as transparently as you can, because if it's not a fit for them, again, I don't want to bring anybody in and 3 months later have to figure out why it didn't work out.
Yes, exactly. You want them to have a really good understanding of what their day to day is going to look like.
Yes.
And as you were talking, I was just thinking about at what point do you sell them on this company, this
Mhm.
role? Where are you doing some of that?
Yeah, I think starting at the assessment, I'm having the supervisor start to talk about those type of things. I also think getting to talk to somebody is also part of the selling process, right? Because those people, like, I'm obviously not going to put them with a disgruntled employee, right?
Right.
I'm going to put them with someone who's succeeding, who someone's been around a little bit of time, who, loves the situation and can speak to that. So I think that's part of, and that's why I try to not oversell it ourselves. I want them to have a private conversation with someone who isn't truly, like, whether they hire this person or the next person is not truly invested in any particular individual, but A players want to have other A players on the team.
100%. Like loud and clear, all the CEOs out there listening, that is so critical. And when you've got a couple of A players and the rest are B's and C's and you're not succeeding, that will impact the A players. We just can't have it. We
No.
really have to think about how that impacts the entire team.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, A players not only want to be challenged by people at their same level, they also get frustrated with companies who clearly aren't willing to take action and hold people accountable to not, when an A player is hitting the expectations and a C player is not, and the company doesn't do anything about that, that's a morale problem.
Absolutely. And it causes good people to leave.
It does.
So it's a really important thing to take note of. Okay, so now they've talked to an employee and hopefully had a good experience. They're still interested in moving on. You're still interested in moving on. What happens next?
30 minutes with a high level executive. Could be the CEO, could be the founder, could be the CRO, could be a VP of sales if they're reporting to a director level individual. So, like, the highest person I can get on the food chain for 30 minutes. Again, and I give them the same speech that you just gave. Sell them. Like, again, we've already qualified them in. They're our person. We want to close the deal. So I bring in my closer. So I'm like, bring in the closer. Let's get those last 3 outs and get out of this game and go, and go to the nearest bar. So come in
Very
as the
good.
closer. Yeah, I tell them, I go, put a big red bow on it. Like, put a big
Yeah.
red bow on it. And then again, like, how impressive during the interview process that you get to speak to someone at the C-suite, right? I mean, that means that the message that sends is that every employee that we hire is that important, that a C-level executive will take 30 minutes out of their day to meet with them.
So at that point, pretty much that C-level executive has been briefed and knows that this is a great candidate. Unless they have any serious reservations, right? That candidate's going to
Yep.
move forward. At that
Correct.
point, they probably won't, but it can happen, right?
You can.
So, all right. So let's say everything's good. Then is the next thing the offer letter?
It is. Actually, not the offer letter. Again, Christy has rules around these things. And so I make a verbal offer. So I call
Verbal
them and
offers. Pause
yep,
there. So
yep,
important. So, and I
yep.
always want to say something, and you're probably going to say this too. Like, is there any reason that you wouldn't take this offer? Is there any hesitancy? Right. So go ahead and tell us about how you do that.
Yeah. So I call the candidate and say, we are ready to make a verbal offer. Before I do so, I need to know that you are ready to accept or decline within 24 hours.
There you go.
Because I know they're actively interviewing with others. And if you're in the middle of another interview process with 2 more companies, or you're down to one other company and you want to see that through, you should do that. And I'm not going to let you take my offer and play it against me with the other
Right.
company. So
Right.
if they
And
say
then
to
they
me,
have other candidates that if
that's
they don't
right.
say yes, we need to keep them moving through the process as well.
That's correct. And so, if they say yes, then I make the verbal offer and then I follow that up with an email and tell them, and then I schedule the call literally 24 hours in advance and or in the future. And then I'm going to get, and I tell them between now and then, any questions, so I'm sending them an email. So I'm giving it verbally, but I'm following that up with an email in writing with everything I said, benefits package, handbook, anything that I need to get in front of them to make decisions. And then I said, and any questions you have need to come in the next 24 hours. And that includes, texting me or calling me at night so that I can get those answers for you so that I can get a yes or no from you in 24 hours. And if the people who say no, like, no, I'm actually not going to be comfortable doing that, I go, great. I know that you're in talks with other companies. Share with me where you're at, which, by the way, Alice, I'm asking every step of the way. So
Right.
even when they have that private conversation with an employee, I'm calling behind that and saying, hey, how did it go with Susan? Tell me about your conversation. And again, if it's been
Yes.
2 days, I'm like, and tell me, I mean, every time I talk to them, and I try to, by the way, as a tip, I try not to let 48 hours go without an appointment, right? So I'm trying to schedule meetings at 24-hour increments because I do want to keep them going. And what'll happen is companies who are moving a lot slower than that, they'll start to say, well, like, you guys are now 3 steps ahead. I don't know when this next thing is going to happen with that company. I don't have the kind of transparency that I'm having with you. And those kind of jobs just seem to like kind of melt away, which is what I
Yes.
want them to do.
Yeah, you're impressing them because
Yes.
you're moving through this process with consistency.
Yep. So if they say no, then I say, great. When is your last whatever? When's your final interview with that company? And they say Tuesday. And I go, great. Then can we talk at 4:00 Tuesday afternoon? Right. So I'm going to keep my job warm. I'm going to keep in the game. And again, if they decide to take another job, like, again, no harm, no foul. We part as friends. But if I get the yes, and then I get the yes 24 hours later, then I'm sending the written offer, by the way, which I also require be signed and returned within 24 hours. As a result of that rule, I don't make offers on Friday.
Right. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't need
Make
anybody going in and like going to the bar on Saturday and Sunday and talking to everybody they can think and all these people coming back with their opinion. I don't need that.
No, exactly. Oh my gosh. Well, this has just been fascinating and so instructive. I really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
I could talk to you about this all day, but we are running out of time. So I really appreciate how carefully you've crafted this process and how consistent you are in applying it. And I really think that that is what every CEO needs to consider, right?
Yes.
How are these interviews being conducted so that you have the best chance of getting an A player? Because later on, after we've hired them and then the sales leader's telling you, yeah, they're not performing and all these things that, and we're not hitting our number. And it's because, this hire and blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, no, too late. It's
Right.
like, let's get this part of the process right. Let's hire the right players. And then, of course, let's coach them well and get them up to speed and get them producing and not have all this regret around hiring people and letting them sit for months and, oh, maybe they'll improve and
Right.
maybe we'll give them a little maybe and maybe and maybe. Nope, you picked the wrong person. They picked the wrong company, the wrong type of job.
Right.
Let them go, right? So we've got to start with a better hiring process. That's a number one.
Yep. I'm going to give your listeners one last tip.
Yes.
Because as part of my hiring services, I also stay on and support the first 2 weeks of the onboarding process. And the reason is, if I'm going to go to the trouble to find you an A player, I'm not allowing you to screw up the onboarding,
Yeah.
because that is as important as all of the things I've just taken the candidate through. If I've taken the candidate through all of that and had this amazingly professional interview process, and then their laptop doesn't show up on the Monday that they're supposed to start, and they don't have logins to any of the sales tech tools, like I have, like, you've literally, thank you for donating to my vacation fund, but that's really what you've done. And so I put together an hour by hour, day by day onboarding schedule for the first 2 weeks, and I participate to make sure they don't screw it up. So don't screw up onboarding.
Yeah, that is so important. Yeah, words to the wise. Don't screw up onboarding. It needs to be a written process that is followed and someone has to manage it. You
Correct.
don't leave the new hire on their own to manage their own onboarding
From their
process.
home office in another state.
No, right.
No.
Exactly. No, crazy, crazy, craziness. All right. Well, lots of great advice for CEOs to take a peek into what their hiring process looks like and talk to their sales leaders about how they're doing things. So, just upon us parting, I know that you've written a book. I want to share that with everyone. Tell us a little bit about the book and who it's for.
Yes, I wrote a book. It's called Selling Your Way In, the playbook for setting your income and owning your life. And I wrote it for sales professionals, individual contributors, because I do believe that I was seeing too many people not get to the top 10% because they were not picking the right sales roles, selling the right thing in the right company. And so it's not a how-to sales book. I'm calling it a professional development book for sales professionals. So if you want to give a gift to your sales team, uh, get the book, get it in their hands. It really is going to put people in the best position. I also hope that it helps candidates, self-select out when the role that you're hiring for isn't a good fit for them, and nobody, then don't end up with a B or C player and they don't end up frustrated.
Yeah, we need to help all sellers be better at interviewing for sure. So, just before we part ways today, I have three questions to ask you,
Yep.
and we'll collect those answers. And then we are doing some fun things with those so that CEOs have a lot of advice from other CEOs. So, the first one is, what is a book that you believe every CEO should read?
I actually is more of a webinar, if you will. I'm a big Brene Brown fan. So Dare to Lead. Dare to Lead is actually the book I would recommend from her, but I would also recommend that you listen to The Power of Vulnerability. I think as a CEO, human psychology is something that you should have an interest in and should really understand about what makes people tick. And so Dare to Lead, and then The Power of Vulnerability.
Love that. And what's a podcast that you listen to? May not be a business podcast, but you listen because it makes you think differently.
Um, My First Million. My First Million is the podcast that makes me think differently.
Very good. And what does every CEO need to know to win in this current marketplace?
I think that the culture that you build, and I do think that you can separate the wheat from the chaff by building a culture of accountability. And so if you don't have one, I think that's going to help in the future. First off, A players want to be held accountable and B and C players don't. So if you come in with that culture of accountability and you start talking about expectations at the beginning of that interview process, people will weed themselves out. So again, there for all kinds of reasons, and I'm not talking about just the sales department, Alice, if you now have not created a culture of accountability at your organization where people hold each other accountable, people hold themselves accountable, and no one gets ticked off when an executive holds them accountable, you're gonna have a much better company with much better employees.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Christy, for being on the show with me today. Really appreciate it. It's been very, very informative.
Thank you, Alice. I enjoyed our conversation, and I'm excited to your listeners to take a listen.
If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.